Hello. Hello, this is the My Artifact episode number 3610. Today's date is September 24, 2025. It's been almost like a night at 9:54 p.m. Alright, let's just jump into the question. Let's go. Okay. Question is, what if we could control weather pattern at will? Oh my god, that's a really good question. Okay. First of all, what is at least this question and why am I asking this question to myself? Okay, this is a kind of like a what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? Is because of that what if question is a kind of like a simply really kind of like a simply very different way to kind of like give the answer. Because like a basically in generic form of kind of like a give the answer is a kind of like a simply casual way. But when I ask like a what if, then it's kind of like a something that I just have to kind of like a create such a reality regarding about that particular question. And regarding about that reality, what will gonna happen in that particular reality, I have to be kind of like a thinking through knowledge whatever I have regarding about that particular question. Like this question, it says kind of like that key, what if kind of like I control the weather and things like that. So if I kind of like control that, if I kind of like think that key I would control the weather, then how would kind of like a world look like? If everyone control the weather, then how would kind of like a world will look like? What will gonna happen and things like that. There are so many questions that arise regarding about what if questions. Okay, yeah. And when I ask this what if question, it's kind of like something that I understand more, I try to figure it out more, I kind of like revise the knowledge that I have more. I don't know how to say, but it felt really good. It felt something that good and great. By the way, let me tell you one thing. While I was giving this answer, this what if question, this answer is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either too. As I mentioned, artifact is a raw format, it's a raw thought, it's a whatever the thought inside of my head, I'm kind of like a printing in this recording format. So basically it's not the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right, but it's not exactly wrong either too. It's a kind of like a somebody just I'm trying to revision, I'm kind of like a revise the information regarding about what I have and things like that. All right. Okay, so let's just jump into the question. Now the question is that what if we could control the weather at will? Okay, so if such thing, what if we could control the weather? Can we able to control the weather? Well, like basically, let me tell you one thing. Can we control the weather? We can technically control weather, technically, but not the way. Okay, it's a very hard to explain. Okay, let me give you context. Okay, yeah. Have you know the concept of cloud seeding? Okay, let me give you what is actually cloud seeding. A cloud seeding is kind of like a things that whenever the cloud is actually available, you have to kind of like fly the aircraft. Okay, yeah. And kind of like a simply throw some sort of silver iodide or kind of like some sort of material, I don't know what it is really, probably silver iodide. Okay, yeah. So what is actually they do is that whatever the cloud is actually around that area, that silver iodide are kind of like a simply happen like a chemical composition happened in the kind of like in the clouds. Okay, yeah. And when it happened, the it rainfall is actually happening in that particular area. So like this is the way that you could control the weather, but not exactly the way you like basically you just kind of like somebody just control it is cloud seeding is not the kind of like a way that you control the weather. It's not like it's not kind of like a way that I would supposed to say that cloud seeding is the kind of like a way that you control weather. Definitely not. It's just kind of like assembly is this thing that cloud should supposed to be kind of like a create rainfall at somewhere at some time. So before before that happened, I would kind of like assembly make sure that cloud seeding happened like before a point. I have to be kind of like when the cloud reach at B point, so I have to fly the aircraft and kind of like throw the silver iodide and somewhere, and at the B position all the kind of like assembly the rainfall is actually happened at the B position as it should supposed to be rainfall at A position. So it is that. So it's kind of like a thing that it's not kind of like a somebody controlling the weather. It's kind of like a somebody is this thing that at somewhere at some time that rainfall happens. So I'm kind of like a preventing that place to kind of like a let that rainfall happen at this moment, so that I would kind of like a prevent further location probably. So that is called cloud seeding. It's a really cool way to do that thing. Okay, it's not really cool way. It's a very common basic scenario. It's just like you do fly the aircraft and kind of like assembly go up to almost like a 3,000. No, probably 10,000, 20,000, 20,000. That is too much. Probably, okay, I'm talking about in feet. Okay, I'm talking about actually feet. So 25,000 feet. Okay, so if you arrive at 25,000 feet, actually above the cloud, you just have to kind of like throw that silver iodide, and then rest of the things actually happen automatically. So yeah, this is the way, but still cloud seeding is not the way that you control the weather. Definitely not. Okay, now let's just kind of like think that, okay, imagine a reality that what if we could kind of like control the weather. Then what would gonna happen? Control the weather means what? Like basically, if we want rain is actually happen, if we want like basically the snowfall is actually happen, if we want kind of like a sunlight is actually happen, if we want like the flood is actually happen, it just like whatever I want, just weather is, it's kind of like somebody the have you seen the movie name X-Men? In the movie name X-Men, there is a mutant named Storm. Storm has a kind of like a power that control the weather, and she can kind of like somebody do the lightning and kind of like it's I don't know, but does she have that power of control of weather? Not really, but somewhat. Okay, but kind of like from a visual point of perspective, you can imagine that kind of like a girl. Okay, like basically imagine you are a kind of like a storm. You have kind of like a power of storm. Storm is the name of her. Okay, yeah. So what would be? There are so many things that I would do. Okay, like basically it's this thing that I like rain. So probably I was thinking that ki let's happen some sort of rain. So I'm kind of like imagine that ki what if could rain happen and then suddenly rain happen. Okay, yeah. I like snowfall too. By the way, I haven't really seen the snowfall. I haven't really seen the snow, dude, till now. Okay, I'm belong to the India, by the way. Okay, and there is no snow at all. Okay, for the millions of years there will be not a snow. If I go to the Kashmir or kind of like a Himalaya, then I might see the snow. But in my rest of the life, or in my like right now, whatever the life that I live, I haven't really seen the snow, and I don't know what I feel when I kind of like suddenly get into the snow. I just wanted to feel that snow, but whatever. Okay, yeah. So I will definitely gonna kind of like went into that particular place where snowfall is actually happen, and I will gonna enjoy that particular thing. I don't really know how do I supposed to enjoy that thing, because it's like I didn't like winter that much, but still the snow is a kind of like a thing that I wanted to experience. Okay, whatever. Okay, yeah. So if we have kind of like a power of that particular controlling the weather and things like that, this is the stuff that I would kind of like somebody do. Now basically if I'm kind of like thinking from just my point of perspective, like basically like I like rain, so let just rain happen. I like snow, so snow happen. I like the kind of like a lightning, so lightning happen, and things like that. It's just kind of like assembly the whatever I'm thinking and it actually happened. But it's from my point of perspective now. But if I'm kind of like a thing that everyone is actually kind of like a thinking that way, then what would be happen? Like imagine a scenario, okay, yeah, that let's just say that 10 people are actually kind of like a thinking about rain is actually happened, and the other 10 people actually thinking about snow is actually happened. Then what would be that scenario? Snow and rainfall at the same time. How would be that? It was kind of like a very mixture, right? Or imagine a scenario where 10 people are kind of like a thinking that kind of like a some snow, and 10 people thinking that heavy sunlight. Then what would be that? It's a very different mixture, right? Like basically some people might be think like that let's get kind of like a winter, let's just get almost like a 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, and another 10 people might be thinking that let's just get harsh sunlight. It is also not really possible. Okay, yeah, because like if 10 people actually or 2 people actually thinking the different thing, the impact of thought process actually happen in the surrounding situation, and surrounding situation are kind of like shared by multiple people's. Example, imagine that I like rain, I thinking like rain, like I think that let's just rain happen, and rain happened. Okay, yeah, but because of rain happen, other people might gonna affect that na too. So other people might gonna think that ki, what the fuck is this rain? Okay, yeah, who actually think that rain? And basically other people kind of like somebody think that ki, let's just remove this rain and kind of like somebody make a sunlight. And when the sunlight is actually happen, I am kind of like a feel that ki, no, I don't want sunlight, like basically give me the rain. So when this thing happened, the conflict is actually happened, and this is kind of like a create and chaos and things like that. Now that chaos is kind of like a something just in casual level or kind of like a local level, that is okay. But what if we could imagine a country level example? Is this thing that ki the how many, like basically which country has so much population, they have kind of like a somebody they have kind of like a somebody that ki too much thinking about weather. Like basically is this thing na, the people who has most popular, like most kind of like a people in that particular country, they might think that ki they have kind of like always have a rain, good weather and things and that and that. And they always think that ki kind of like some drought is actually happening in the neighboring country, or flood is actually happening in the neighboring country and things like that, because of the human thought process and things like that. And when this thing is actually happened, then the country who has the most populated country, they would kind of like do the weather war with the rest of the rest of the world. And this would be kind of like a very devastating situation happen. Imagine a scenario where kind of like a somebody, the world war is actually fought by the weather, the lightning and kind of like a floods and hurricane and things and that. Yeah, it is kind of like a somebody is this thing now, the beginning of the beginning of the thought process actually came from kind of like a, what if we control the weather, and very pleasing kind of like a thought process would came from that. But when we try to think about a kind of like a bigger scenario regarding about the world and things like that, then this would be kind of like a destruction na? Like basically flood, hurricane, or kind of like a somebody tsunami, or kind of like a somebody the lightning, what would gonna destroy? It gonna destroy a lot, like a really lot. Like what if kind of like some people kind of like imagine that in the neighboring country there will be snowfall is actually happen, and that snowfall kind of like a happen so big that each snowball is kind of like equivalent to the size of the bus. Now can you imagine, like basically that snowball is kind of like a size of equivalent to the bus. When it throw or to the city, then that city will be kind of like a destroy, dude. Literally destroy. Just imagine that scenario, dude. What if like some country kind of like a decided that kind of like a neighboring country has a kind of like a freezing ice cold winter happen, like Antarctica and things like that? This would be super crazy. And because of like basically so many people will kind of the people who kind of like remain, they will kind of like think that because of this country did with us, now I have kind of like a responsibility to kind of like teach them a lesson. Then they would kind of like do the same thing, and this would be kind of like a very crippled reality, dude. Very crippled reality. Let me tell you one thing, the real fact regarding about weather. Okay, yeah. Weather is a very delicate ecosystem, very delicate ecosystem. It's kind of like a thing that na ki if one thing is actually happened, then rest of the world is actually affected by that. Have you understand the concept of El Nino and El Nino and El Nino, El Nano? I'm not really sure, but this concept is really interesting. Okay, let me tell you one thing. Okay, yeah. So right now it's 2025. Okay, yeah. Since COVID happened, means 2020 to 2025, the rain is actually happened very less. I'm actually living in India, so probably I'm kind of like a say that ki the rain is actually happened from 2020 to 2025 is very less. But this year 2025, rain is actually happened so much extremely that it was kind of like a somebody just flood and things and that. Why this thing is actually happened? Like basically it's a kind of like a cycle. El Nino is a kind of like a cycle that 5 year your monsoon is not came that much in India. Okay, yeah. And after the 5 year monsoon came so much in India is because of kind of like a somebody the kind of like a earth is actually kind of like a okay, let me tell you one thing how the weather works. Weather is a like should I supposed to tell the weather? Okay, yeah, just okay. So how do we have a season? Why we have a rainfall? Why we have a sunlight? Why we have winter? Why we have all that thing? Why, what is at least this thing? Like basically is this thing that every atmosphere globe has a kind of like a some season and things like that. Let's just say like Jupiter. Okay, yeah. Jupiter is a gas giant, by the way. They don't really have a kind of like only weather and things like that. But what I'm trying to tell you, why this kind of like a weather happened? Why is this thing? Is because of that our Earth is kind of like a tilted at 23.4 degrees Celsius. Okay, yeah. It's not rotating kind of like a something exactly 90-degree. No, it's actually rotating at kind of like a just slightly tilted. Okay, it kind of like a tilted. Okay, because of it tilted, the north and south pole are kind of like a somebody just deflect. Okay, so basically at some part of the kind of like a somebody pole, like a basically Antarctica, 6 months is kind of like an entire day and 6 months is kind of like an entire night because of the earth is kind of like a tilted at 23.4 degrees Celsius. I'm not really sure about this 23.4 or maybe kind of like a 4 degrees Celsius. I'm not really sure about that. Like I don't know about this particular rate of the degree. Okay, yeah. Now because of this tiltation, okay, the kind of like a the side which is kind of like a face towards the sun is kind of like a bitterly hot. Okay, yeah, the side is actually not face to the sun is kind of like a bitterly cold. Okay, yeah, but earth is kind of like a rotate in its own direction, its own axis too. So when it is rotated, the hot air and kind of like a cold air kind of like a mix together, and when it kind of like a something mixed together, it create kind of like a something the weather pattern, hot air and kind of like a cold air. Okay, yeah, let me tell you one thing, cold air is kind of like a bit really heavier than hot air. So hot air kind of like a goes up, but when the kind of like a earth moved to the kind of like away from the sun, it kind of like a became cold. So basically when it cold, it kind of like a wind fall and the hot weather came up. So basically this is kind of like a some up and down kind of like a simply weather is always happen. Now this is only one scenario, there is multiple scenarios actually happen because of the earth is a kind of like a rotating. So our atmosphere is kind of like a somewhat something rotating but in opposite direction. What do you mean by that? Okay, let's just say that you are running the cycle. Okay, so when you are running the cycle, you are kind of like a feel lot of air that you are resisting. How this actually feel is actually feel because of that you are kind of like moving forward and kind of like a some wind is kind of like a some you are facing that what's create the resistance and things like that. Okay, what I'm trying to tell you, when you move forward, the wind is actually giving you pushback. Same thing happened with the earth too, means like that when the earth is kind of like a rotating clockwise, because of the clockwise kind of like a somebody, the wind doesn't really kind of like rotate itself, but because of kind of like a only the entire the mountains and the countries and everything is kind of like a rotated. So basically is this thing the we are actually facing some sort of kind of like a something the resistance and things like that. So it kind of like a something like basically earth is kind of like a rotate clockwise, then whether like our atmosphere is kind of like a rotating anti-clockwise, probably I'm not really sure about this thing, but kind of like a try to connect the dots if I'm trying to think about that. Okay, now this is the second scenario. Then another scenario is that the different part of the world is kind of like a bit really hot, different part of the world is kind of like a bit really cold, like equator area is bit really hot. So basically is this thing that the kind of like equator area is bit really hot. So basically there is a kind of like a somebody so many kind of like a hot air is kind of like a went up and cold air is kind of like a gain inside. So when this thing is actually happened, then kind of like a drought is actually happened in that particular area and things like that. Okay, now kind of like a polar region are bitterly cold because they are not facing that much sunlight. So when they are not facing that much sunlight, so they are kind of like accumulated lot of cold air. So when they are kind of like accumulated lot of cold air, it kind of like a little bit frozen and things like that. So that's why Europe and kind of like assembly the Canada are kind of like a bitterly frozen, as well as Russia is also a little bit frozen too. Okay, so these are kind of like a continents or kind of like countries are close to the North Pole, right? So this is what it is. So basically is this thing, our weather pattern are connected with so many little bit complex things, dude. So many things. Okay, yeah. And basically is this thing, even if we have like a really smart technology, we have mobile phone, we have like a hundreds of satellites actually revolve around the planet and things like that, but still we cannot predict the weather. Still today we cannot predict the weather. Yeah, let me tell you one thing, like basically is this thing, the weather prediction that you are kind of like a seeing your mobile phone or kind of like a news and things like that, those are kind of like a prediction pattern are not exactly correct. They are kind of like a giving you approximation, like a they approximate that okay, this would be happen like a within a 24 hour might be rainfall happen or not. It's an approximation. Okay, yeah, like after all those kind of like a technology and after we all the know regarding about weather pattern and things like that, still we can't kind of like a somebody predicting the weather pattern. Still we can't predict the weather and things like that. It is that much complicated. It is like a weather is kind of like a things that na ki it is affected by lot of things, the global warming, the green, the floods, the kind of like some equator. There's a lot of things, dude, lot of things. Okay, yeah. It's not just one thing. And if you are kind of like a thinking that ki, what if kind of like a people were start thinking and kind of like a weather would control, then it would be add even more kind of like a stuff and stuff like that. So regarding about what I thinking about this particular stuff, what I realize, okay, what is actually my conclusion? My conclusion is that ki if we could kind of like a simply think, if we would kind of like have power to kind of like a control the weather and things like that, what would be that reality? That reality would be chaos. Definitely chaos. Because let me tell you one thing, you are kind of like a responsible person that you're gonna use your power very wisely, but other person might gonna use that power very wisely. Do you kind of like somebody give the guarantee of that? Definitely not. Other person might gonna use this power for his kind of like somebody own purposes or own kind of like somebody the satisfaction or kind of like somebody the target and things like that. So this is not exactly right now. Definitely not. Okay, yeah. So probably is this thing, if we have kind of like a power of controlling weather, it would be chaos. Just only one answer is a chaos, and that's it. There is no kind of like a really good hope and things like that. Definitely not. So weather that we have is a kind of like and also let me tell you one thing now. Okay, yeah. How many planets that we have? Okay, yeah. You actually thinking that is 7 or 8 planet, right, in our solar system? Well, yeah, 7 and 8 planet. These are kind of like a planets, but I'm talking about kind of like a somebody like a how many planet does have kind of like a somebody the weather, like basically the weather that you are kind of like a seeing. Does Jupiter has a kind of like a weather? No, Jupiter is a kind of a gas giant. It doesn't really have any weather. Then Mars has a weather. No, Mars doesn't really have any weather. Like basically they have like I don't know. It's very kind of like a complex and things like that. Every planet has this kind of like a some certain weather. I'm not gonna say that they don't have weather and things like that. They have, but it's kind of like a something very, like, I don't know. It's just something that na ki probably is this thing. Weather is a kind of like a something very delicate thing, and we shouldn't supposed to mess with that. That is the only one thing that I know. All right. And if you wanted to kind of like a simply understand this kind of like a, you are really like a really like um interested regarding about the weather and things like that, how much it kind of like affect the weather, then I would suggest you a movie named Geostorm. Watch this movie. It was like really amazing movie. It's kind of like a tell us about like a basically this, it's a kind of like a in this movie they kind of like a mention a hypothetical scenario where they kind of like a control the weather by kind of like a big machine and things and something like that. And the way that they execute the movie was really great, and you just understand how much consequences happen if we mess with the weather and things like that. So it's really good. If you are really interested regarding about this, watch this movie. It's really good. It's actually available on um, Disney Hotstar. Okay, I'm not really sure about the future. I don't know when you are kind of like listening this, that movie might not be available in Hotstar or maybe somewhere else. I don't know. Yeah. But this is it. I should supposed to be end here, and thank you.